agencies. They are maintaining equipment on board the station and installing new equipment. Now we refer to those nowadays as EVAs, or extravehicular activities. I'm from the old school. Spacewalk was fine for me, but anyway, the gentleman in that picture, his name is Ed White, and Ed was one of the astronauts who was killed in the Apollo 1 fire. We kept this room open and very active well into the 1990s. Not with this equipment, mind you. Just had to be a little careful when you open the bottle at the other end. But probably what's more important about anything on the floor here is what you don't whatsoever. Now let me explain. In today's control room, especially the space station, if the flight director, and that's the person 14 miles up, that space station going around the world every 90 minutes, suddenly starts going up to clear that debris that it possibly might be a danger. We didn't have that capacity. Had ever traveled to another world and set foot on that world. That took place in July of 1969 when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin put their lunar surface waiting for their return. It was in this room that the words were first heard. Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. And a short time later, again in this room, lunar surface, he said, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Now, those words were heard by approximately 40% of the world's population back then, so you'd think they came through on a big, huge speaker, a boom box. You'd be wrong. There's the speaker that we heard those words in. And you would imagine that, rightfully or unrightfully so, that was the first time that mankind had ever journeyed to another world. You'd be wrong there too. You see, that journey took place 8 months before Apollo 11. And Jim Lovell, yeah, that same Jim Lovell that later got in trouble on Apollo 13. They performed the first translunar injection. They left the orbit of the Earth, went 240,000 miles away, orbited the moon. In Vietnam, the escalation by the enemy of an unpopular war. March 31st, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, declared to the world he would not seek another term as President of the United States. He was sick. He died 5 years later of massive heart failure. April, the assassination of Martin Luther King in Memphis, Tennessee. June, the assassination of Robert Kennedy in Los Angeles after he had won that state's Democratic primary. Hey, let's keep it on a roll. We had the invasion by the Soviet Union of Czechoslovakia when that country wanted to leave the Soviet bloc. August, we had riots in the streets of Chicago during the Democratic National Convention. The rest of the year wasn't any better, believe me. Came Christmas Eve of 1968, and a message was heard in this room, and it was heard around the world. The 3 men I mentioned on Christmas Eve, read from the Bible. Genesis, nice touch. It was how they finished their words that was the most meaningful thing they could have said. Good night and good luck to all of the people back on the good earth. Yeah, that's how they described it, the good earth. Good night from Apollo 8. It was that message right there that was the first time that mankind had ever journeyed to another world. And it was controlled from this room. We didn't think much about it until about a month later we got a letter from a woman in Missouri, and she simply said these words. Dear NASA, thank you for saving 1968. Papa. As you go down to get back on the tram in the lobby, there's a picture that they've asked me to escort around Johnson Space Center. I always say the same words before I say goodbye. I would like you all to remember that we are all of us, children of the same universe. You see, I bloody well don't care where you're from, because we all live on this little blue rock called Earth, stuck away in an infinitely small part of an infinitely huge universe. And to give you an idea how big that universe is, last year in 2007, our colleagues with the STI group, that's part of NASA, the Space Telescope Institute, they pointed the Hubble telescope into space and did what they call deep field imaging, which is a scientific way of saying they took some pictures. The piece of space they photographed was the size of a grain of sand, held between your fingers, hold it at arm's length, and look up at a nighttime sky. That's not a very big piece of space. It was what was inside that piece of space that was the most amazing thing, because I saw the pictures and I thought it was a picture of what we call a stellar cluster, a bunch of stars. And I was told, no, those aren't stars, Terry, those are all galaxies. We counted more than 3,000 galaxies inside that one little piece of space. It's 3,000 Milky Way. With that in mind, we still believe here that it's man's destiny, and we definitely know it's a privilege to be able to explore that universe. So we'd like you to remember, please, that mankind's future is going to be in space. That's how I would normally close my briefings. Except when they tell me I'm going to be talking to the public in this room. Because you see, I'll come in the morning with a cup of coffee, and I'll walk in that door down there, come in and check the floor and make sure everything looks okay. And invariably I will get goosebumps, or the hair on the back of my neck will go up. Why? Because I knew the astronauts. I knew the men who worked in this room. I knew the things that they did here. I remember guys like Alan Shepard, the first American in space, even though his mission was only a 15-minute suborbital flight. He came back, and because of a medical condition, he couldn't fly again for quite a while. So, as all astronauts have to, he spent time at Capcom, that console right down there, talking to fellow astronauts while they were on mission. I remember guys like Christopher Kraft and Gene Kranz, flight directors. Their position was right here. You see, the flight director during a mission is the boss of all bosses. Gene's probably the most famous because of Apollo 13. I see Gene about once a month. He comes around to say hi. I remember a gentleman by the name of Wally Schirra, who was one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. Wally had one Apollo mission, Apollo 7, and after that, he became famous sitting next to Walter Cronkite, explaining to the world what was going on during the Apollo missions. We lost Wally last year. He passed away in August. There was another gentleman I knew. His name was Deke Slayton. Deke was also one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. And because of a similar condition that Alan Shepard had, Deke couldn't even get his first ride. So they made him the director of astronauts. He was the man that for years and years gave every astronaut their missions, their assignments. He was the one that decided. And then he had an operation, and he got his flight status, and he had his first ride. It was a good one. He was the commander of Apollo-Soyuz, which was the beginning of a space station concept. And we lost him about 3 years later to cancer. You see, folks, this room is full of ghosts and it's full of memories. So I'd like you to do me a favor. In the future, when you see us journey back to that space station, we've got about 9-10 more missions up there. That station's going to be complete by the year 2010. When you see us journey back to the moon, there will be an American on the moon by 2020, if not sooner. And shortly thereafter, there's going to be a permanent lunar base, and there will be people from all over the world living on the moon from now on. When you see us journey to Mars, and that mission is coming a lot sooner than you realize, I would like you to remember the day that you sat in this room right here, and you looked at this room right here. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is the room where the journey began. It began right here on a December night in 1968. Enjoy the rest of your tour, folks, and I thank you for coming to see us here at Mission Control. Bye-bye.
Đây, cô 拍一个，来过来，来看一个，来，丽亚拍一个。